YouTubers are lying to you about the Philippines. I have a unique perspective because my family is from the Philippines. Today we're going to break down the pros and cons, and by the end of this video, you may realize that the Philippines may not be for you. So first I want to talk about the pros of living in the Philippines. Number one is definitely the cost of living. I think it's a little more expensive than Thailand and Vietnam, but it's still nowhere what you would be paying in Europe or in the West. Because most expats are only going to be really staying in Makati or BGC, it's kind of hard to talk about Philippines as a whole because those are really just bubbles, and that's where I guess the people with money in the Philippines live. It's not really indicative of the rest of the Philippines. Of course, things are a lot cheaper in the provincial areas, but I don't think most expats are going to be spending time here. So rent in these areas are going to be ranging from maybe around $700 a month to upwards of maybe even $1,500, $2,000 depending on what you get. Also having people come and cook for you, clean your house, watch your kids, all of those services are extremely cheap. Filipino people are absolutely amazing. They're some of the most friendly and hospitable people that you will ever meet in your life. However, they can be quite problematic, which we will talk about later in this video. The women here are beautiful, but I think it depends on your taste. For me personally, I don't find the women in Manila that attractive. However, in Cebu, surprisingly, the women were extremely beautiful. The women here are a lot more marriage-minded because of the Catholic values, especially the ones from the province. So a lot of them want to meet a guy and have kids and be a stay-at-home mom. Age gap relationships are a lot more accepted here. So that's why a lot of retirees come to the Philippines, because 50, 60-year-old men can get with a 19-year-old or a 21-year-old, and it's quite normal. It's maybe not as safe as some of the other Asian countries, but compared to Latin America, the Philippines is very, very safe. You may have to worry about slight pickpocketing here and there, but a lot of the crime is targeted. For example, like a political assassination, or you mess with the wrong syndicates. If you're just an average tourist, nothing's gonna really happen to you. There's access to a lot of good international food. Surprisingly, there are a lot of Western options in the Philippines, but because it's an Asian country, there's also a lot of Japanese, Korean, Chinese, a bunch of different Asian foods. And Filipino food is awesome as well. Sinigang is my favorite soup of all time. BGC specifically has a growing entrepreneur scene, so if you're looking to network and meet like-minded people, that is a great place to do it. One of the biggest pros is that it is an English-speaking country. So coming there as an American or someone from the West, it's a very easy transition for us. It's very easy to get a long-term visa there. The Philippines also has a lot of direct flights to anywhere in the world because there are so many Filipino workers overseas. There's a lot of beautiful beaches. There's a lot of natural beauty in the Philippines. And if you have the money, the healthcare is not that bad. And if you're super into music, singing, dancing, karaoke, Philippines is one of the best places for it. Karaoke and Filipinos are like peanut butter and jelly. They freaking love their karaoke there. Alright, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. Most men that go to the Philippines are not going for the culture or the views, they're going for the women. And this is a complicated topic because I personally have no issue with the passport bro movement, and even all of these older retired guys come to the Philippines to marry a younger girl. A lot of people make the argument that there's exploitation going on. I don't really see it that way. It's two consenting adults agreeing to be in a relationship, and they're both getting something out of it. The man's getting a young, beautiful wife, and then the woman can essentially take her whole entire family out of poverty, because it's quite common that as soon as she gets married, the man takes care of the rest of her family. I think the biggest issue with a lot of passport bros, they conflate sexual tourism with actual dating. A lot of these older retirees go to the Philippines and they're not trying to sleep around with a bunch of girls. They're just trying to find a younger, more attractive wife. They really have that long-term stability that a lot of these women are looking for. Personally, I don't think that's really an issue. Now, I will agree that there are a lot of sexual tourists going to Thailand and the Philippines, but this is an interesting thing because unlike Thailand, where a lot of creators go there and sexualize the women, I think in the Philippines, the Filipino women also sexualize themselves. One of the biggest culprits of this is the Filipina P. There's a lot of videos online about dating Filipino women. A lot of them are sex related. They're made from Filipinos themselves promoting that to the world. So I don't think like a lot of foreigners are going to the Philippines specifically to try to sexualize the women the same way that a lot of people are doing in places like Colombia. So let's get into some of the pros and cons of Filipino women. Number one, they're extremely diverse. It's this beautiful mix of races that is very physically appealing to a lot of people. And that's why they've won Miss Universe so many times. A lot of the women here are loyal and very marriage-minded because of the Catholic roots, and especially the one from the provinces are still raised with traditional values. They are definitely a lot less promiscuous than Western women, and the country itself has a lot of strong Catholic values. A lot of them speak English, which is a plus, and they are incredibly short. I think the average height for the woman in the Philippines is like 5 foot, and the average height for a guy is 5'4". So if you're a short king, 5'5", 5'4", it's quite easy to find a partner there. Shout out all my short kings. They're also super fun at parties, similar to black people and to Latin people. They're out there dancing, they're singing, their karaoke is always brought out in Filipino parties, so they're just always having a very good time.
Hoy, kain kayo, okay? Nasaan si Kain? Hoy, yung bata na si Soy. Kain pa, ha?
They're also extremely open to dating foreigners. Americans are definitely seen as higher status, maybe not always with the best intentions, and they are also very clean and hygienic people. But what are some of the cons? Just walk around the malls in Manila and you'll see that there are also a lot of fat people everywhere. And in my opinion, the average Filipino girl is actually not that attractive. It's just the extremes are extremely beautiful. They are notorious gossipers. Filipinos, very similar to Latin people, love to gossip all the time.
I know, did you hear? And then she tell me, I'm going to divorce. I'm like, my God, divorce? I know, right? My gosh.
The Philippines has a lot of social climbers because it's a very status-based society, which you can expect when there's a very high wealth inequality. So it's kind of hard to trust the intentions of a lot of women that you're speaking to, especially if you're American. I know stories of so many foreigners who arrived to the Philippines and got a girl pregnant within 2 to 3 months, and now he's stuck with that woman forever. Now, I'm not saying that the Filipinas are gold diggers, but if you've come from a very poor country with a high wealth inequality, those women will put a lot more emphasis into finances. And that applies to everywhere in the world, whether it's Ukraine, Russia, I would even argue the US, Latin America, and especially the Philippines. Because I'm Chinese Filipino, a lot of my family was born and raised in the Philippines, so I kind of have this like weird half and half thing going on. But if you're like a white or black American, you are always going to be seen as the outsider. And when things go south, don't be surprised if all of them turn on you. And one of the big things is that if you marry her, you are essentially marrying the rest of her family. You may have to financially take care of the rest of her family. The involvement and the opinion of her family is going to be very important in the relationship. All right, so let's talk about some of the cons of the Philippines. I think the number one issue is the infrastructure. Overpopulated, it's extremely dirty, very polluted. They don't have really good options for public transportation. It's very crowded. The traffic is horrendous. There are a lot of natural disasters, and it's just overall not a well-developed country. There's also not drinkable tap water, which is actually a big issue in most of Asia. Out of all the countries that I've been to, poverty in the Philippines is some of the worst that I've seen in the world. Poor wages, a big portion of the population being extremely uneducated, and a huge wealth gap between the haves and the have-nots. I remember when I went as a kid, the population was at 80 million and it already felt super overcrowded, but just over the last 20 years, it's ballooned to 110 million. It's a population increase of almost 50%, so all of those issues are way worse. A lot of people also have the poverty mentality. Here's the metaphor I like to use. Let's say you're walking on the street. You have a beautiful street that's paved right in front of you. You're allowed to look at the trees, look far into the distance, look at the weather, because you don't have to watch where you're stepping. And now imagine you're walking on a road and it's completely broken. You can't really see into the distance. You're only looking at the next step so you don't get hurt. When you have a little bit of wealth and you're in a more developed society, a lot of things are taken care of for you, so you're allowed to think a lot more into the future. But a lot of people from third world countries, because they don't have a good pathway to success, they're only focused on what's in front of them. It's very difficult for people to get out of poverty, which is why a lot of these women are looking to marry foreigners, because if they get pregnant by a foreigner, they're able to take their whole entire family out of poverty. And unfortunately, in the Philippines, they have this mentality that in order to climb the ranks and become more successful, you have to put other people down. This, I think, comes from the fact that the Philippines is made up of a bunch of islands, so I think the people are a lot more tribal in nature. So please don't take this the wrong way when I say this, but the education system in the Philippines is extremely poor. Now, I'm not saying that the Filipinos are dumb by any means. It's just the access to good education is heavily gatekept by the rich. The country as a whole does not really prioritize education that much. The average IQ of the Filipino is on the lower side. The only way to get a good education in that country is if your parents can afford to put you in private schools and private universities. And this is really interesting because I would even make the same argument for the US. In the US, the average public school education is not that good, but if you're able to go to some of the most prestigious universities, which are extremely expensive, I think university in the US is a scam, then you'll get the benefits of a good education. But I think the majority of the population is quite ignorant. When you have a higher population of educated people, they get into more engineering jobs, tech jobs, things that really take the country forward. But when you have the majority of the population that is poor and uneducated, they are a lot more focused on trying to get ahead rather than trying to do what's best for the country. So one of my biggest issues is that the Philippines is a very materialistic and status-driven society. The Philippines is so diverse, so I think this can vary based on the place. In Manila, specifically Makati, I felt like everybody there was super fake and trying to be an influencer and social climb. So a big issue that I've heard from Filipino is that a lot of them are two-faced and are not afraid to backstab you. If you get with a Filipina girl, you're also getting with the rest of her family. So that means you have to put up with the notorious gossiping, a lot of the shit talk behind your back, all the judgment that comes from them as well. And the family will know everything about your business. I personally like to keep my things a little private. I have a mutual respect for my family, but they allow me to live my life. Yeah, that doesn't really happen in the Philippines at all. When I was in Cebu as a kid, we were walking along the beach, and I remember I cut my foot because there was an open metal bar just on the shores of the beach, and my whole entire front toe was like cut up and bleeding. I remember when we were younger, we were like island hopping, and it surprised me that the Filipinos that were working on the boats and stuff were throwing trash and their cigarette butts into the water. They didn't really care for nature that way. Tourism is one of the main ways that you guys make money, so why aren't you guys taking care of the environment that attracts tourists? And it didn't make sense for me. Going back to the problem that just in general, the society isn't extremely forward thinking. One of the biggest issues of the Philippines, and the locals will tell you this, is the bureaucracy and the corruption. The Philippines is notorious for corruption, and this has happened for years. This is a good thing if you have money and if you have a little bit of fame. So if you want to get anything done, as long as you know the right person, you can kind of bribe your way to get what you want. But everybody knows that there's a lot of corruption in the government. People get there and take all of the funding that was supposed to go into infrastructure. That's why the majority of the Philippines is still extremely underdeveloped. I hear that a lot of the politicians are also paid off, and there's just a lot of shadiness going on in the government in general. And I've even heard stories of police officers stopping taxis for no reason, forcing them to pay a bribe or else they'll get a ticket. Unfortunately, the system is set up to keep the rich rich and keep the poor poor. So in my opinion, the Philippines is actually a little boring because there's not a lot of things to do. The main things to do seem to be going to a mall, maybe going singing or dancing, going to the restaurant, going to a beach, but I think that gets old really quick. Something I love about Europe is that you can go out and you can walk around and there's beautiful parks, there's really good public transportation. You don't really need a car to do anything. In Makati, there's a specific area called Poblacion where all the bars and all the prostitutes are. A lot of people hype this place up, but to me, it was just so gross and grimy. A lot of the prostitutes were men. It just seemed very trashy. BGC is nice because it's a little more of a business district, but they're not really like clubs or things to do. Because I have family and friends there, they were able to show me around and I got to see a lot of the lower key spots in the Philippines that locals go to. The average foreigner is not gonna know this place exists unless you have a local show you around. And if you live outside of the city, like my family does, you need a car to get anywhere. You can't just like take public transportation. You can, yes, order a Grab or you can order like a motor taxi, and that totally works. And even something I like to do in Southeast Asia is go to computer cafes and play video games. They don't really have that in the Philippines, the same way that they do in Thailand or Vietnam or a lot of places in East Asia. This may be a personal thing, but I personally don't really care for Filipino weather. I think Baguio is probably the place in the Philippines that I would like the most because it's like 16 to 21 in the mountains. Reminds me of Manizales in Colombia, which to me is the perfect weather. In the Philippines, you have heat and the humidity and a lot of dust and a lot of pollution as well. I always develop a cough when I go there. I would also say that the food quality in the Philippines is very questionable. Yes, you can go to the supermarket and buy some fresh stuff, but if you eat at a restaurant, a lot of the food feels like food from the US. High in calories, but low in nutritional value. It's a lot of like canned and processed food. I remember growing up, a lot of the Filipino diet came from imported food because they're an island. Yes, you can cook yourself, but one of the draws in being in Southeast Asia is not having to cook. In Thailand and Vietnam, eating on the street is cheaper than cooking at home. I mean, granted, you can hire somebody to cook the food for you, but I don't know, that just seems like a lot of work. That's why in Manila, they have a big obesity population because the quality of the food is not that good. And Filipino food specifically as well. Yes, there are some healthy options, but a lot of Filipino food is fried, high in sugar, high in fat, high in salt. Should I do Vietnam next? I'll leave my information down below if you guys want to contact me for a consultation. See ya, peace.